Hey everybody, thanks for joining the podcast. I'm here with Nguyen. He is an incredible entrepreneur, a visionary. He has created a crowdfunding site called Republic, and he's really one of the biggest players in the early stage ecosystem. Welcome, man.
Josh, thank you so much for the generous intro. A pleasure and an honor to be here.
So you came up with this crowdfunding platform that has really turned into a ubiquitous crowdfunding platform. But if you don't mind, I'd love to kind of hear your story of how you got to that and what made you think to build out such a kind of robust platform for early stage companies.
Absolutely, Josh. I actually started out with a very boring career in law. So I was a securities attorney in New York, and then I was in asset management. Like the hedge fund is a $40 billion fund. So you just move massive figures with a lot of zeros around, and actually went back to academia to teach law in Palo Alto for a couple of years as well. But I can't really take credit for coming up with crowdfunding or equity crowdfunding because it's a virtue of regulatory evolution. And under the Obama administration, a ton of people lobbied through, with the Jobs Act and to bring forth something that is more sensible, meaning it makes no sense that the law from the 1930s to 2016 did not allow anyone who wasn't a millionaire to invest privately, and yet people can spend on lottery tickets to buy thousands of dollars of products they don't need, spending so much money in the casinos, and yet couldn't invest in one of the most important asset class of our time. So that law happened to change in 2016, and I think that overlapping between societal changes, technological innovation, and regulatory evolution that made crowdfunding possible, or regulation crowdfunding. We call it retail investing. And so the time was just right. So I left AngelList, where I was a GC, to launch Republic.
That's really cool. I don't know if you know, but I got a law degree as well and then went the entrepreneurial path. I think that it's pretty common. I feel like a lot of people either I went straight into entrepreneurship after law school, but I feel like a lot of people do make that jump. So it's cool to hear that you got a law degree as well and also were a practicing attorney. Uh, so looking at what you're saying, I really agree. I mean, especially when you look at like Sarbanes-Oxley and the stage at which companies are going public now is so much later, right? Like Amazon, it went public at sub $1 billion. So somebody that got in on IPO there, that would basically be like a Series C round in today's dollars. So your company really gives access to the outsized returns. You came up with the idea. What were the steps to kind of build that? You went from AngelList, you were the GC there, and then what? How did that transition fit together?
I've always said that when it comes to building the Republic business model, there are probably not too many industries or business models that are more expensive, time consuming, and risky to build because we didn't have a market to try to grab. People didn't know, most people, 90% of people now still have no idea what private investing means. So it's a lot of like creating the market as you build a company. But yeah, created the platform. I'm very fortunate to have very talented co-founders and early team members who were able to like launch a platform. We obviously borrow a lot from AngelList, and the deal flow was one side of the market and trying to get the worked out by through our advisors, through media partners, so that the more people knew that they too can invest, the more we make the market and build the industry. But in year one, we moved merely $1 million in total of total investment volume transaction across 10 companies. So on average, it was about $100,000 per company to fundraise over the entire year, right? So, I mean, it's still a lot, but not that meaningful. And fast forward now, I think there are certain months. I think in April we deploy over $50 million in just 1 month. So it's exponential growth for the entire industry, and obviously Republic is at the forefront of that. So we're in some way both the beneficiary as well as the warrior, hacking down trees and opening up new
Absolutely.
paths
And
at the same time.
having been an early stage founder myself in multiple companies, how good did that first million feel? Because like, making, and not like it's your million, but to cross that $1 million mark, even though we talk about it today and you did 50 million in February, how meaningful was that to kind of validate your investment thesis?
You know what was really, really meaningful was when the first company closed in the first 6 months, and I think they raised $50,000. And it was through so much work, and unless the company raises half a million, half a million, we operate in the red, right? Because it takes so much work to prepare and launch a campaign, but it showed that there's true product market fit, that there are people out there deploying $50, $100 by reading a story about innovation, about a vision that they believe in, and put part way with money that they probably won't see again for a number of years. And hundreds at the time of people did that in the first campaign. I think it was incredibly validating. But every single deal that we help close, I think that's what makes me and the team grind that much harder to help close for the next batch of deals. But yeah, it is still very much a grind, a day in and day out. And we're still an early stage company, Josh. The reality is that until even after IPO, sometimes it still doesn't work out. But I can tell you this, even though I have no doubt that about the future of the industry, and I have very little doubt about the future of Republic. Even if everything was to come to a screeching halt today, that there is no such thing as retail crowdfunding, the companies that have already raised and the investors that have been empowered to invest have already made it so worthwhile. That journey that we would do it 10,000 times over again.
And so what you're saying to me resonates with what I see with the most successful people in the world is that the value you get is really on the journey. And when you love what you're doing, you're going to end up with a great result as a byproduct of enjoying the journey. I've been watching your platform and just watching you evolve. I know as a CEO, you're like very hands-on with all different aspects, but I've also watched the ecosystem evolve where at first it felt like there was a little bit of a stigma that if a company went on Republic or a similar platform, maybe they couldn't find funding from Andreessen, maybe they couldn't find funding from Sequoia, so coming to you. But lately, that's really changing where your platform becomes an incredible hybrid customer acquisition, fan base building, and way for somebody to add on a retail fan base that can almost be like a free marketing team. Like the company that comes to mind is Alto IRA, right? Like they recently closed on your platform. I put a small investment in with them, and then they raised 17 million in their Series A. And I mean, by any measure, they're a real company, right? Like, so how do you feel about the evolution? You have to be like, you kind of caught the wave just right.
I love what you just said a moment ago about it's the journey that matters, and not necessarily the end result. And I think that that should be the same for every founder, for every founding team. And when you have more people to share that journey with, it's just that much more meaningful. So a company, even if it's not a consumer focused company, and you can bring in hundreds of your high school friends and college friends and cousins who, are not accredited, and some who are accredited but don't want to invest a ton of money, and be able to bring all of these people on board because they believe in what you do. How can that possibly be a negative signal past the initial doubt of a new industry? So, as a function of an industry that's maturing, I think the false narrative about anything that's new and changing status quo, and people begin to see the fundamental value of retail investing, which is marketing and community engagement. And there's no question in my mind that looking at society that we're living in at large, and I should focus that on American society because I'm not as well versed outside of the US, but the next phase, the next trend of household brands, they're gonna all be community focused. That's why you see Clubhouse, the success of that. LinkedIn is a community. TikTok, all of these social / community / engagement. And because of that I think retail investing in Republic can provide a value that comes with that capital that's very synergistic, additive, and supplemental to venture capital. It is not competitive in any way. And I think that's one of the reasons why companies like Alto and Alpha Flow and Gumroad.
For the first time ever, when GameStop and Wall Street Bets came together, and you had a crowd of retail investors, to see the amount of force that could hit with, to have the retail investors come out, and then combining that with some of the heavy hitters of the institutional capital like Michael Berry, that to me symbolizes a direct mirror for what's happening in your space of the power of syncing those two things together. I mean, I think they almost bankrupted, what was it? What was the hedge fund that shorted Wall Street Bets called? I'm just drawing a blank.
Starts with an M, I think.
Oh, Melvin Capital.
Not
Melvin
really.
Capital.
Yeah, Melvin Capital.
Yeah, great memory. But like they almost bankrupted Melvin Capital. I think that if the larger player hadn't stepped in to help them out, and so I think that the power of retail investors is huge, grossly underestimated. And am I correct that the Jobs Act has changed to where you can now raise up to $5 million? It used to be like $1 million that you could crowdsource. Now you can raise $5 million. Is that correct?
There are actually two different sets of regulations. One under Reg CF, so it's like pretty light for a company to go through. And yes, now you can raise up to $5 million per year. For more mature companies that want to spend $250,000 in legal fees and accounting and take 6 months, you can raise up to 75 million from retail.
Wow.
And of course, 10x that in terms of cost and time is the IPO process that can cost $5-10 million just to do, and a year plus to prepare. So the three tiers is like a bicycle, a Honda Civic, and a Ferrari. But the fact that, just like you said, I think the Reddit and GameStop saga is a reflection of a trend globally, that retail revolution. And I think there's a distinct shift in generational approach almost. So when we went to law school and graduated, investing was this kind of boring thing, at least for me anyway, that you should do. It's kind of like going to the dentist. You're a responsible human being, and so you should look at an accountant and public market and Fidelity, but you do your fun things, your passion on the side. And I think that's changing. I think people want to align profit with passion, with interest. And I think that alignment at small scale, you're going to see that reverberate throughout all different industries. And you're going to see new asset classes, how now people invest in sneakers, and it's actually a very legitimate, in NFTs, right? You're gonna see more forms of investable assets, from music to art to movies and sports and beyond.
So you made this analogy, right? And you were talking a little bit about cars, which kind of makes me think about one of the biggest crowdfunding by dollar that we've ever seen, which was by Tesla. I don't know if you think about it in the same manner. They didn't get equity in the company, but Musk crowdfunded the Model 3 with pre-orders, and he ended up generating like something around $500 million by the time they all shipped out by just like kind of pre-sales. And I know that's not the same thing as equity, but it kind of lays into the scale of the amount of money being in the multi-billions that could be allocated into this space by retail investors. I just think it is so incredible. I wanted to ask you, you brought it up. What do you think about NFTs? What do you think about the crypto space?
2 weeks ago, probably I would have been even more optimistic, but I think the recent fluctuation of this past week is a very healthy development. I think that people, and this kind of like almost a lesson, right? Anyone who's new to investing, and a lot of people are new to NFT and crypto and even retail investing, they gotta know that these things are highly risky. So without these kind of like fluctuation and almost like shock people to into recognizing that, hey, you should be spending $50 to learn but not $5,000 if you're gonna plan to use that $5,000 to pay rent in 3 months. So use the amount of money that you can afford to lose and view it as a learning experience. Getting started or learning by getting started. But I think crypto is overall the technology is I think one of the most important ones in my lifetime, and I think that the adoption, particularly by retail investors, in the long run, if you map it out over 5 years or 10 years, I don't see how this would not be probably the defining asset class of our time, beyond just the technology and use case. So I'm very, very bullish on crypto as an asset class, but again, long term. And I'm obviously incredibly convinced, have strong conviction in the technology and what it will do to fintech and financial services. And we are integrating every day more and more of blockchain technology
Do
into
you think
what
you'll
we
ever
do
get
at
to a
Republic.
place where you offer NFTs for an investment to be like, I'm an original investor in XYZ company?
Yeah, so the focus at Republic, so right now you see a lot of securities, investment in equities or whatnot on Republic. But our goal, Josh, and I don't know that I've ever shared this publicly, our goal is to be the investment platform that anyone around the world can come to, whether it's $20 or 2 million, and can find things that they believe in and invest in that and potentially realize a profit. That means even though today we have real estate and crypto and early stage startup and late stage and music, not game financing and revenue sharing, there's no question in my mind that we will be adding more and more asset classes to the platform as time goes by, because we need to appeal to the broad range of interests of the general public. So the answer may very well be that down the road there may be NFTs being introduced by Republic, or even public stock being introduced on Republic. But right now the focus in the near term is very much on securities, equity investing, things that are backed by true economics rather than the
That makes a lot of
commodities,
sense. Do
tied
you think
for.
you could ever envision a world where you're a secondary liquidity provider for a company raises their Series C or Series D, and the first 20 employees want to get some cash out before they do an IPO or a SPAC?
I imagine you're going to see that by this time next year, and probably even much sooner than that. But for sure, if we believe in private investing, we all know that illiquidity is an inherent component of that. And so you gotta fix that somehow or make illiquidity just a little bit more liquid if you're gonna hope to have millions and billions of people diving in and adopting it. And so there isn't really a solution out there. And so it's natural that Republic, our team, has been thinking about it.
That's so smart because I think that's one of the things that's a barrier to a retail investor is, your average seed round to IPO in a great company might be like a 7 year lockup. For a retail investor, that's kind of an insane amount of time to have your money tied up. I mean, if you're an institutional investor, if you're a professional and allocate X amount of your capital to, long run VC plays, that's great. But I mean, I think that when you can add those levels of liquidity, it will price in. It's a better investment of your time to be an early stage employee because you can have a level of liquidity that you wouldn't have before. And ideally, you can get to a place where you don't have to take a massive hit on a secondary market. And, SoftBank is investing at $100 a share and you're going to sell your shares at $30 a share, right? So I think that's amazing. What things do you think are the most important for an early stage company to be focusing on? Because you're both a successful individual as a entrepreneur, but you also have seen thousands of companies come through, some successful, some not. What advice do you have for somebody who's in that early stage role?
It still goes back, I think, to what you said about enjoying the journey. And the only way to actually enjoy the journey, what is typically a very difficult journey because there's so many peaks and valleys, is if you have a guiding North Star that is not monetary, is that if you believe so much in the mission behind it, why you and the team are building it, so that even on the hardest day, the day that you got 20 rejections from VCs and that you just pulled 3 all-nighters that week, that somehow you can still find meaning out of the work that is being done. If that's the case, then I think the perseverance, then if that's the case, then I think that there's that requisite perseverance to ride things through and combine with a little bit of luck tend to yield a very successful outcome. Most startups fail because they run out of money too soon, because people get burnt out and all of these things. So if you keep riding things out, and if there's a component of luck, then things happen to work. And even if things don't work out, the journey is worthwhile. So I don't have like any sage advice because each startup is so different, but the value of perseverance positively, I think is something that I still don't see enough. I get a lot of people share their perspectives as founders, and there's so much pain and suffering and sacrifices, still, so to speak. And I think that if people can see that getting to be a founder, getting to build your vision is such a privilege that even on hardest days,
I couldn't have said it better. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's weird because today being a founder is really cool. It's in vogue. You get a lot of social validation for it, but 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that wasn't the case, right? And so I think for someone like myself, I'm sure for you, running my own company is almost the only way that I feel comfortable. And when I get to do that, I feel really privileged. And you spend your day doing the things that you want. But as you said, there's an enormous trade-off for that. The cliche saying is, I don't have. I can pick the 80 hours a week I want to work for myself, so that I don't work 40 hours a week for someone else, right? And even 80 hours a week might be a light load for an early stage founder, but I think that you have to love it, and it has to be a level of dedication because there are going to be so many situations where you're going to have to go above and beyond that you have to enjoy it and want to do that and appreciate how much better that is. And I think the flip side is being self-aware to say, not everybody should be a founder.
Agreed. And Josh, I'm gonna guess that you knew yourself sooner then I knew myself by virtue of being able to make that decision fresh out of law school and be a founder. I think anyone who decided to go down this path, but out of reasons or out of, if someone goes down this path and has a lot of insecurity or lack of confidence in the world, that's going to make it that much more challenging. So I have no question, I have no doubt in my mind that had I started out, or let's say build Republic, fresh out of law school, I probably, due to the number of insecurities and the lack of confidence that I had at the age of like 22, 24, that it would have been much more difficult for me. And when I look at other founders like you and some of my dear friends who drop out of college and build these massively successful companies, I very much envy, but in a good way, the maturity that you guys have or had at 22, 24, that in my case I know I didn't have. And going back to what you said, I think self-awareness is so key in life, but that is that much more important
Yeah,
if you're a
but
founder.
at the same time, you can make the argument that you made the connections, you built the resume, you were much more established when you stepped into the entrepreneurial role than I was in my first entrepreneurial role. And so there's an enormous amount of value in your network. And to say, I used to be GC here, when you speak to an investor or even to a friend. And I think that there's pros and cons to it, but I think that knowing yourself and some of the things that you might have described as personal insecurities may very realistically be flaws that you fixed over those years. And maybe not even flaws is the right word, but from an investor standpoint, things that you worked on so that you were capable of really high level of execution once it was time to take on outside capital.
Yeah, I agree entirely, Josh. It's not so much to say that I would have done things differently or that one is better. I think it's just the notion of the more at ease you are at any moment in life, the more in the flow it's gonna be. And of course, the less fictional whatever you're doing is gonna be. And so, if, however, one gets into that state of mind, that ease, I think is very important. But just like you said, the reverse is that in the earlier phase of life, people tend to not be at ease, but they have more bandwidth and less obligations, family or otherwise. That's why you still see founders, first time founder leaning young rather than having two kids to worry about, private school tuition or whatever else it may be. But that said, everyone's life on everyone's journey, depending on what it is they build, is so different. But yeah, I'm very, very grateful that the experience that I've had have come to be so relevant to building a company in a highly regulated space, and in a space that is changing almost every day, on the regulatory front and on the technological front as well.
I gotta assume that your legal background gives you such a strong competitive edge in such a highly regulated field.
I think fintech is half legal and half engineering and business. And in the crypto space, probably 60-70% legal. And so I think any team doesn't have to be the co founders, but having internal legal know how and pragmatism, I think, is truly crucial to their ability to be competitive and execute quickly in fintech.
But I also think that your legal background gave you the foresight into the kind of changing winds into the investment space. You were probably able to see a little farther down the line than most people would have because you took that legal career. And if you hadn't went that road, you might be doing something totally different because your perspective would be very different.
Absolutely, and I think the appreciation for regulators and not thinking of them as these scary individuals who are just there to punish the private sectors and know that it is a collaboration, it is a dialogue, and everyone wants things to be better. So I think that comfort to a degree of working with the public sector, that is the government and the regulators, I think is also very, very important.
From your perspective, I feel like the audience would love to know how you raised your first round of funding because you're like the king of first rounds of funding. So how did you raise your first round?
Oh man, Josh, we have an unusual financing history. Again, I actually don't know that I've ever shared our financing history. People assume that because I knew a lot of people coming out of AngelList, that fundraising for Republic must have been a walk in the park. It was not. It has not been. Because what we do, like you said in the earlier phase, there wasn't enough indication of growth, and that there were so many misconceptions about retail investing being, adverse selection, leftover, etc. So AngelList seeded us on day one, and that gave us, the lifeline to operate for about 2 years, very thinly, very, very on a shoestring budget. And I raised another small seed round in late 2017 from a consortium of VCs that are very credible, but they weren't Sequoia, Andreessen Horowitz, because I can't tell you how many, I must have gotten 150 rejections, and each was probably about a couple meetings, a couple hours, Zoom pitches or whatnot. So collectively, it must be thousands of hours dealing with VC, explaining the model, but they're like, love you and love the team, but you know what, this is too early. We don't think this is gonna be a thing. And so the willingness to just, getting no, and have thick skin, learn what you can and move on. But we managed to really, because we saw how our regulatory framework at Republic was and is the key to blockchain adoption, a compliant way to offer securities token to the general public. And through that and pitching that model, we got a major investment from Binance. We are their first portfolio company. And through that, Passport Capital and a number of large VC came in to invest. So we raised by now over $20 million in token sale. And we very recently closed a large Series A round backed by Galaxy Digital and Nasper Process, which is one of the largest investment firms in the world. And Tribe Capital and Hashed and whatnot. So we're more better capitalized now than we ever have, but it's through a lot of trial and tribulations. And I gotta say, in the past 5 years, we came close to not making it maybe twice. In terms of like just running out of capital. It's not an easy process for anyone who's building anything new, much less building a new industry.
That's like an amazing story. And there's so much I want to ask you about that. The first thing I want to say is congrats with Binance. I mean, from what I hear, they're an amazing investment partner. And is it Mike Novogratz? Yeah, I hear he's a really good partner as well. I mean, those are, make an argument in the blockchain space that is absolutely on par with Andreessen, Sequoia, any of those spaces. I mean, those are top tier investment firms putting their faith behind you.
Josh, and even now, there's still that bifurcation of VCs, traditional VCs and crypto VCs. And it's clearly a bifurcation of raising traditional capital from VC and PE and doing token financing. But there's no question that a few years out, the two will merge completely when someone is going to be selling securities in the future. These securities are going to be tokenized and digitized, and it's just securities. That's how we don't electronic mail. No one really uses actual mail anymore, aside from like credit card companies maybe. So it's just going to become, the two worlds are going to merge. But we're very grateful that where Republic sits in what is a fast changing financial ecosystem that we managed to build partnerships with both traditional VCs like Tribe Capital and AngelList on the one hand, and on the other hand, with the Galaxy Digital and the Binances.
Out of curiosity, are you familiar with a cryptocurrency called Harmony One?
I spent a few afternoons at their home in Mountain View, and yeah, we haven't. We probably should catch up soon. But the crypto space in the U.S. among the credible projects is still a pretty small circle of everyone knowing everyone else. But I'm a huge fan of what those guys are building. Nick and Stephen.
Did you do the barbecues at their place that they had on the weekends? Is that where you hung out?
Yeah, on Saturday. I've never, I haven't been able to join the barbecues. I joined them for lunch a couple of times, but I'm still splitting my time between New York and the Bay Area, and Mountain View is a little bit of a way from San Francisco, but yeah, one of these days it's for sure.
That's really cool because I mean I put the two together when you said that you're because I think they seeded out of Binance as well. I believe that was their largest investor for their project, and they've done really well. I mean, I think they reached like a $2 billion valuation at some point, like maybe a few weeks ago before we had a little retraction, and they're still like $1 billion company, which for like a small team is pretty crazy.
Josh, it's remarkable, right? I think some people may not even fully appreciate how fast things are changing in a way that is almost unthinkable 5 years ago. 5 years ago wasn't that long ago. And the notion of a multi-billion-dollar company growing out of nowhere, and it's just not just one example, using, I mean, token sale is a way of raising from the crowd, that how fast things are changing, and I think that evolution, that constant reinvention of the processes and the system will continue to happen. There's no reason why we assume that venture capital should be what it has been in the first 50 years of its existence. Of course it's going to change. And how it's going to change, I think retail, going back to our conversation at the beginning, will drive much of it. I have no doubt we're going to see more and more and more iteration as the world of financing and investing becomes much more connected and much more globalized. The breaking down of jurisdictional barriers between countries being one, and the ability for people to participate with $5, $10 from all corners of the world is gonna make things, I think, much more prosperous and resilient. In fact, despite the inherent GameStop volatility that can come with it, but net, there's no question in my mind that unlocking retail capital that's being locked, being cash under people's bed in Ethiopia, in Vietnam, or whatnot, and funnel that into the financial system globally, that's going to yield a much more prosperous world for everyone involved.
I tend to, so I do some teaching in cryptocurrency at Carnegie Mellon, and just like kind of like adjunct-ish, and I always describe it like today we're at the place that the internet was in 1997. And the possibilities for what cryptocurrency can do would be like if we went back to 1997 and you and I were having a conversation and said, what can the internet do? Because the reach of what can occur with cryptocurrency is so wide and so deep, and also realizing that we don't even have the appropriate infrastructure set up yet to even tap into 1% of what we're capable of doing. I mean, it is mind-blowing.
Absolutely. I love that example. And we always, one of our taglines in the earlier days is that we want to be Amazon for private investing or for investing. But if you look at like Amazon in the 90s, it's really hard to predict. Or 1 year over the next year, is the stock going to go up or go down? Because at one point it dropped like 80% or whatever. Stretch out over a decade or 2 decades, well, everyone knows the story. Or similarly, imagine if, I think at the time there was Netscape, Linux, Yahoo, there are a bunch of like web browser type platforms, and some of them obviously no longer exist. If you put $100 in like six of them at that time, and five would disappear, but one would grow, Google or whatnot, then you can see the return over time. So how people ask me all the time about, oh, do you have any, investment advice for those who kind of like new to crypto, but just wanna have some fun with it? And my recommendation is like, just don't just pick one asset class. Use the money that you have to have fun. Spread it out among the major projects, 5, 10, 20, and then see how they grow over the years to come. But I'm incredibly excited about the future ahead. And I think that analogy that you made between blockchain and the internet, hopefully in time, it will show that blockchain's growth and impact may even outshine, the internet itself.
You're incredibly smart. You're incredibly forward thinking. You're willing to deal with bad UI, bad UX. And so you're probably very, very deep into the space. But you have to realize like there's a lot of barriers for your average person to interact with the space today. Whether you're looking at, gas fees for Ethereum, whether you're looking at cold storage of hardware wallets. In 20 years, we're going to see this be as easy as the internet is. And kind of thinking back, remember the internet, if you picked up the phone, it shut your internet call off and it was like so slow.
Absolutely. And Josh, I'm the last one of five in my family, and my siblings and their spouses definitely have higher IQs than mine. And even just 2 months ago, at a family reunion, in a conversation that came up, none of them had any familiarity beyond just knowing that, like, Bitcoin, and there's something called Ethereum. Is it ETH? Is it something like that? These are all accomplished professionals, doctors, or with PhD in, semiconductor engineering, of reasonable, they're not super wealthy, but they're like comfortable, just middle class Americans. No idea. And they live in California. They read what? Can you imagine? And I just had that moment. I'm like, oh wow, I definitely live in a bubble among colleagues and friends like you. That we all live and breathe this for a while. That we sometimes, or I sometimes, don't realize that much of Americans have no idea and still are so foreign to this. So as they begin to learn more and participate and adopt, that's the true potential of the future ahead.
100%. I mean, if you took 10,000 people in the United States and asked them all, how does an oracle interact with a layer 2 protocol? How many people do you think could like answer that?
10,000? I'm gonna guess less than 10 or 20.
I think so too. Maybe if you ask people in San Francisco, it might be a little bit higher than if you ask people in, Idaho or something. Just and maybe not.
But Josh, the craziest thing, if you ask 10,000 people, how does emailing work? Again, 5 people may know, but it doesn't matter that no one else does because they're all using it. Except that, now getting online, open up a Gmail account, everyone can do, or anyone can do for, even for your 95-year-old great-grandmas. But eventually, it's going to get there in which people still have no idea what all of this means, but it becomes so simple to own, to trade, to use crypto assets, and certainly tokenized assets.
Yeah, I almost analogize it to like the light switch, right? Like your 92-year-old grandmother knows if you flip the light switch, it goes on, flip it off, lights go off. no one needs to understand how the hydroelectric power plant or the nuclear, right? Like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if where your electricity comes from, photovoltaic cells, or the light switch goes. That's what matters is the user experience and the end user result.
Facilitate connectivity. It makes life easier, more convenient. Yeah, and then how do you get it to a level where people in Venezuela, with their, you know, national currency being in flux, that farmers can have a way to spend to maintain two things of value, and I think we almost there. It gets better and better every day.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I think is interesting, and I know I want to be respectful of your time. We got 10 minutes left on your calendar. Is kind of the bridging of the cryptocurrencies so that you can get into, and we'll say like Harmony, right? Like they've got like a 2 second finality with like 1,000 transactions for a penny. At that point, you're really able to use that as currency if you like bridge something over and you're okay with the fluctuations. And I think that's going to be the future, right? Like if you wrap a US dollar token, whether it's a tether or something else, and you can transact with that with virtually no expense. I think that's huge for Venezuela. It's huge for a lot of places in Africa. It's going to put out of business all of the check cashing places that are predatory for the unbanked. I mean, I'm very excited for the future of it. But what are you most excited about for the next 5 years?
There are a few, developments. Obviously, it really can't really not comment on the NFT frenzy in the U.S. and globally, and I think how over time see true utility for NFTs or that emergence of NFTs with with true value and true utility. I think that's something that we still haven't seen just yet. I'm definitely a strong believer in the world of tokenized asset, tokenized securities. The next, Facebook or again any project with a large community, be able to offer a little bit of skin in the game, economically backed, so that these are not. And I think the moment that my dad or my mom look at something that they vaguely understand to be almost like a digital Super Mario coin that they used to see me play, but that these things are backed or linked to real life asset that they understand, that's when you're gonna see the comfort of people to jump in, to get involved and to buy and trade a little bit more. So whether it's tokenized real estate, tokenized revenue, I think that world is still very much underdeveloped. And a function of that is that the functionalities, the technical functionalities, really have not come to fruition until probably earlier this year. Now there are a number of chains that can facilitate that, from Algorand to Avalanche, Binance Smart Chain. I think that's gonna be bigger and bigger. But the bells and whistle and the infrastructures are there. The question is, can things be built on it at a level and at a scale that can get a lot of people to pay attention? So that's what on our side we aim to do, or at least aim to help usher in. And I think that's what I'm generally most excited about, because it will change every single aspect of the financial system, from public investing to private investing. It's no longer just a vertical or an asset class, it's the entire economic system that we know of
It's amazing.
today.
And just to think about it, pretend that Super Mario came out today, and pretend that if you bought a video game, you got a Mario token that was an NFT that had a $50 value with it, but there's a smart contract baked into it so that Nintendo got 10% every time you flipped and sold that NFT, right? All of a sudden, you're going to have not just the cachet and the cool of like I was a first adopter of Mario and I can beat the game in 20 minutes or something, but you're going to have a financial incentive to be promoting. I mean, I think you're right. I think it's a world game changer.
Or like movies, right? I mean, the Avengers or like Marvel. I don't, watch movies a lot, but I know how popular these franchises are. and imagine the next, X-Men or Super or Spider-Man or whatever it may be. That person, that college kid in India or in Alabama, invest or buy some NFT, uh, it's like poster, movie poster or what have you, but that it does come with a little bit of revenue sharing. So the more he talks to his friends about it and they'll go see the movie, the more he's gonna get some money back, and he want to sell it before the movie comes out to someone else and pay a little bit higher. So all of a sudden you have these things that are blending between traditional investment model backed by asset and things that are socially validated and cool. That's why people wear, I don't know, red sneakers or like a Louis Vuitton bag to like social signaling. So that combination of social signaling and investing, because you're like, it's a whole new world that we're not even at the beginning right now. We're just like trying to like find these use cases and merge them together. And I think that's what I meant by we haven't seen that just yet, that notion of NFTs blended with use case and underlying economic value, but it's coming. Whether or not it's going to come through
I
Republic,
love
only
your
time
vision.
will tell.
I fully agree with what you're saying. It's like right in line with my personal investment thesis. I know we're edging up on the end of the hour that you committed. I really appreciate you being here. Is there anything else you want to kind of say before we wrap up, or anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, no, Josh, I'm just like grateful to get to share our story and perspectives with you and the audience. And yeah, I think I have the opposite advice for founders and investors. For founders who are looking to fundraise, you gotta like learn and acquire information first before going out fundraising, because you're gonna waste a lot of time walking down the wrong path. But for investors, I don't think anyone should be reading too many books about investing, especially now when you can like invest with $5 or $10. You learn so much just by doing it. Like you don't get fit by reading about fitness, but just going out there and go for a jog. And if you hate running, I don't know, go swimming the next day. Same concept, but do it in a way that you don't kill yourself. And that version of that for investing is don't spend your lunch money, spend your drinking money. But if your
That's
lunch money
perfect
for your
advice.
kids, don't
It's the
spend
best way, in my
it.
opinion, for someone to learn is when they have skin in the game, because all of a sudden it gets really interesting. It's kind of like if you watched a football game. It's fun to watch a football game. If you bet $10 on that football game, something flips.
The emotion, the psychology, the excitement, and just the overall, because you feel like you're more than just you. I think there's inside of us the desire to be more than what we are. That's why we buy things, right? That's why people have 10 Ferraris, 5 houses. But these things are static. The moment that you have skin in the game, a little bit of an interest in something, there's that possibility that that thing, and by extension you, would grow over time. And I think that's what makes it exciting, that you don't have to do, and that maybe you help it grow, which is that one investment. So yeah, it's still new to most people. The vast majority of doctors and lawyers still have never done a single private investment. But I have no doubt that the next generation is going to become just a common knowledge, and that's something
That's
that a
really
lot
cool.
of people,
I
if not
agree.
everyone,
Thank you
will
so
be
much
doing.
for your time. This is really cool to hear your insight and get to see where you're at.